everyone. Thank you for tuning in this morning and welcome to another Second Story Press event. We're so glad you could join us at SLJ's Middle Grade Magic for a conversation with author Alma Fullerton. So my name is Jordan Ryder and I am the managing editor at Second Story, and I'm so excited to be talking to Alma today about her upcoming release, The Journal of Anxious Izzy Parker. Wherever you're tuning in from, we're so thrilled that you can join us. So before we get started, I'd like to recognize the ancestral lands on which we work and live. The building that houses Second Story Press's office is situated in traditional territories, including those of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we at Second Story have been privileged to work with Indigenous authors, illustrators, editors, and other collaborators in this publishing house, and we hope that the books that we produce here can in some ways contribute to the ongoing reconciliation process. We would like to work with more Indigenous creators, editors, and educators, and we are committed to making those connections happen. So, as I mentioned, today I'm so excited to be chatting with Alma Fullerton, author of the forthcoming The Journal of Anxious Izzy Parker, and afterwards there will be time for an audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please comment in the YouTube stream below and we'll get to them at the end. Also, comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you have any technical issues with the sound, just pop in the chat and let us know so we can get it sorted on our end. So the Journal of Anxious Izzy Parker is available for pre-order from your local bookstore, library, or from our website at www.secondstorypress.ca. And now on to the main event. So I'm so excited to introduce Alma Fullerton. Alma is an internationally award-winning author, illustrator, and editor. Coming from a military family, she's lived all over Canada as well as Germany. And growing up, she struggled with reading and writing due to her dyslexia. Now she goes into schools to teach children they can overcome anything to achieve what they want in life. She lives in North Lake, Prince Edward Island. So to kick things off, I think I'll give a bit of a description of what the book is and what people can expect, and then we'll launch into our questions. So Izzy Parker is a very anxious and nervous young girl, and her mom have just moved to Prince Edward Island, which is a big transition. And Izzy worries that she will say the wrong thing or laugh at the wrong time, and none of the kids will want to be her friend at school. Sometimes it's so hard to be Izzy that she can't breathe. So the book goes through her journal entries over a span of time as she's struggling with her anxiety and transitioning. And a lot of what the book is about is how Izzy copes, which are some of the questions that we're going to get into today. So I'd love to hear in your own words, Alma, where the inspiration for this story came from.
Well, when I did live in Ontario, I worked as an educational assistant in a school, and a lot of the children after COVID, coming back from COVID, I realized that a lot of children were dealing with anxiety. There were more children than before dealing with anxiety. So I thought, it would be great to write a book with an anxious child, and I have anxiety myself. I even have a little service dog here. That's Gibson. This is Gibson for anxiety. So I thought to put that into Izzy would be a great way to help kids. So that's where the idea came from. So.
Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, so many people are talking about, especially right now, as you said, with COVID and having been apart for so long from people and not having that. Oh, Gibson.
It's going to cause my anxiety today.
Yeah.
It's hard to stroke by you, so.
He's so cute. It's what happens when we do these Zoom things from home. But yeah, it's such an important conversation, and I think there's a lot of catch up that kids need to be doing as well. So having more books that
okay. It's very rare that a car goes by our house, so when one does, he thinks there's somebody coming to see him. So
he gets excited. Well, I have a question about Gibson later on, so we'll have to return to him. But yeah, it's such an important conversation, and I think especially Izzy Parker, she's so relatable in her anxiety, and her voice is so strong, which is, again, one of the things we're going to talk about later today. But you've done such a great job of really representing what it feels like to have anxiety and how it can affect so many different parts of your life from a kid's perspective. And it feels very authentically a child writing this book, although there are a couple doctors, or there's a Dr. Jones that we'll get into as well, who can give other adult and professional perspectives as well, so that the book, it feels very well-rounded. So as you just mentioned, that the book is based on some of your own experiences as well as some of your students. Are the anxiety and coping strategy that Izzy uses and learns in the book something that you talk about a lot with the students, with your students, and you can work with them to help them manage their anxiety as well?
Yeah, I use a lot of them with students, as well as some other ones that I don't mention in the book. And having anxiety, I know it's really hard to remember when you're having an anxiety attack, to remember what to do to
Right.
help it. And it's a process of, really trying different things, because some things will work with some people and some things will work with other people. So as long as you can give the kids the tools to cope with their anxiety, at least sometimes they might remember to use them, when they're anxious. But
Right.
sometimes, like I said, it's hard. And even in the book, you see Izzy can't always use those tools because she forgets. In that, when you're wrapped up with anxiety, that's all you think about, and you don't think about the tools you can use sometimes. So, yeah.
That's a really sweet part of the story, is because they're journal entries, you get a lot of Izzy reflecting, and you see she is in the present moment is remembering the tools that she forgot to use when she was going through the anxiety attack. But and then later in the book, when she does remember to use some of the tools, she can recognize how helpful they were. And so you see a lot of that growth and a lot of her gaining confidence throughout the story as she tries different techniques and how she sees them have real effects in her day-to-day life. So that was one of the parts of the story and the book that I found most honest and helpful at the same time. And I love that kids are going to have this to read and see themselves in, and also learn, hopefully, some ways that they can help themselves too. It's such I mean, we talk about it a lot in our office. It's such a beautiful story.
I think it's really important to know, for kids to know, that it's okay to have anxiety, and that most people do get anxious at times. So, Izzy has some friends that she's worried about expressing that she has anxiety too. And then when she does, she realizes it wasn't as big deal as she thought it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it does feel so isolating and sometimes shameful when you feel like you can't do what other people can and there's something wrong with you. So I love that Izzy goes on that journey to understand just how common it is day to day. So we sort of are touching on this, but the social emotional learning skills are such a pivotal set of skills for kids right now. I think especially for young people today coming out of the pandemic, as you said. So, I mean, was it really important for you to include the SEL skills into your story, and how Izzy was able to progress and learn as she went?
Yeah, it really was, because I think that's basically one of the reasons I wrote the story, so children can get that out of it and they can relate, and they can understand that it's not such a bad thing to have anxiety, and that most people do have it. So I think it was important to just, touch on that. So
yeah, it really brings the story into something that feels very important. It's more than just showing that this happens. It's how can I take this and work with it, and how can I manage it going forward. And I love that Izzy also, as we met Gibson, Izzy also gets her own emotional support animal at the end of the story. So this next bit is a bit of a two-part question. So from the very beginning of when Second Story received the manuscript, the journal entries were so voice driven. I felt like you just knew Izzy was who she was. And her voice was so, the way she wrote and the way she thinks is so clear and unique and in tune with her age too. I think you really nailed that age bracket. So I really loved how you played around with the form of the journal entries by crossing things out as if it's a real school journal, and Izzy's sort of correcting herself and talking to the teacher at one point in her journal entry, saying, "Oh, I know I made a mistake. Start reading here." It's so sweet, and it feels very childlike. So why did you choose the journal format to tell this story? Was that something very intentional from the beginning?
Actually, I was just at that point. I was just trying to get into Izzy's head, and sometimes when I try to get into a character's head, I will write in journal format from that character's point of view. And I had plans to change it into regular format after, but I sent it to the editor at Second Story, and you guys all loved it in journal format, just the way it was. And I was like, well, that makes my job easier. So I didn't have to rewrite it.
Yeah.
But because I originally pitched the idea to Second Story, and you liked the idea, so I didn't have a manuscript. So that was just here's the character. What do you think of this character? And so it just turned out that it was journal. And I think that's the way it turned out, journal. But I loved it. I loved it as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love to hear that your process just really worked out. And as an editor, we love when we don't have to tell someone to rewrite a whole section of their book because it's a huge amount of work. So that's great. I'm glad that worked out the way that it did.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second part of that question, because Izzy's voice is so clear and strong, do you think that it directly relates to the fact that we are in her journal?
I think so, because there were certain parts of it, while I was waiting for an answer from you guys, that I was thinking, well, how am I going to switch this into regular prose? And so I think because it got so emotional in the journal, I was trying to, it was easier. So yeah, I don't know if I could have switched everything into the regular prose without losing some of her voice.
Mm-hmm. And some of her charm. She's so charming. I think that makes sense to me. And I think that if we had moved everything into scenes where you're getting other people's reactions, we would have lost some of that specificity and the closeness that we feel with Izzy, because everything is how she perceives what's going on around her, which contributes to her anxiety. So it just, everything flowed so well together to make Izzy as strong and as charming as she is. So you've recently, since writing the book, moved to PEI yourself. So I'm curious why you chose PEI for the setting of Izzy Parker, and what your relationship was with PEI when you were writing the book.
Well, we used to come here quite often for summer, and it always felt like home, and it was always laid back. And East Coast. We did live in Halifax at one time because my husband was also military. So we spent a few years in Halifax, and the East Coast is just so laid back. And I thought, well, that might be a reason that Izzy's mom wanted to come out here, and her grandma lived here too, her dad's mother. But so I thought that would, it really relieved my anxiety to come here too. So I'm much less anxious, and my husband as well. But it's just a laid back sort of, nothing feels rushed. We're in Toronto or Ontario. Everything felt really rushed. It didn't matter where you were going. Everybody was in a hurry. So that's why I said it there, and that's why we love it here. So,
that's a lovely sentiment. It makes sense, I think, the way that you're describing describing it. And at the very beginning of the book, I mean, it's a huge source of her anxiety, her moving. But her mom has intentionally moved them to PI because of her anxiety. And she thinks that it's going to be a better pace and more conducive to Izzy. So, and it, I mean, I won't give away the book, but there is a big part of where they live is a big part of how they live too. And I do have 2 more questions for you, but on that note, we do have an audience question that is very related to what we're talking about. So I think I'll just hop in and ask this question. So your bio, this comes from Betty Stewart. Your bio mentioned you moved around a lot as a kid, Alma. Did this personal experience inspire the decision for Izzy to move to a new city? So sort of taking off what we were just talking about.
Very much so. I think I moved not quite a lot as a kid, but more as an adult, because we came from a really big family. Even though my father was military, we stayed in Ontario, in Trenton, Ontario, for probably 10 years. And then we moved to British Columbia. So having moved, I thought that was important, that, you know, it would add that extra layer to Izzy's anxiety. But at the same time, you know, it's personal. And as an adult, even moving around as an adult, you get anxious too. So, yeah.
It's like one of the top 3 sources of anxiety, or right, most stressful anxiety things you can go through. Moving is one of them. So that certainly makes sense. And it's, I mean, hearing how much of the story relates to you personally, it makes sense why we feel so close to Izzy and why she feels so real, because you're bringing in a lot of your personal experiences as well, which is really, really, I think, a big part of what makes this book so wonderful. So bringing it back to Gibson, you mentioned at the end of the book you also have an emotional support animal, who we have now met. And Izzy also gets a dog, an emotional support dog, in the book. And her dog she names Gandalf, which I thought was just one of the best names you could choose. And I would love to hear how you landed on that.
Well, one of the names we were going to give Gibson was Gandalf. It was either Gibson, like the guitar, or Gandalf, like the wizard. And because I have Gibson here, I decided on Gandalf, but I also loved it because of the wizard aspect. And Gandalf, you know, it, like a wizard, helps her anxiety disappear. So that's one of the reasons I love Gandalf. And, you know, Lord of the Rings. It's just
it was such a nice detail, and I agree. I would say, I would add, one of the most, because I love dogs. Just any book about a girl and her dog, I'm here for. But what I loved about how you portrayed Gandalf was, even though she suddenly has this Gandalf and he is so helpful and supportive to her, I feel like so much of her coping strategies and how she relates to Gandalf and how she brings Gandalf with her as she goes, it's so much coming from her as well. Gandalf doesn't just magically fix everything, but he is so magic, and he gives her so much confidence to change how she behaves too, which is helpful to her. So I loved Gandalf's inclusion in the story, and that it's so much more complex than just yeah, exactly.
So same with Lord of the Rings. He doesn't, you know, the Hobbit has a journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, Gandalf never just fixes the problem. So there were so many layers to that naming that I loved so much. And yeah, so that basically brings me to the end of my questions. I would love to know what you're working on next, and if you have anything new in the works.
I always have something new in the works. I'm working on illustrations for a picture book, and I'm also working on another middle grade novel. So
very nice.
I don't get into what they're about until they're like published.
Yeah.
Or just pre-published. So yeah.
Sure. Well, I hope that they go well, and good luck. And I can't wait to read them myself. And thank you so much, Betty Stewart, for your question. If there are any other questions, please pop them in quickly. If not, thanks so much, Alma. You've been really wonderful to chat to, and it's so nice to get a bit of the behind the scenes, hearing how these books, how the ideas come to fruition even before they ever make it to the publishing house. So, which is where my sort of role starts. So I always love hearing how authors do their work and how they come up with these really wonderful stories. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for listening, and have a lovely day at the rest of your time at Middle Grade Magic.
Thank you for having me.